The morning sun shone softly over the quiet park. The grass was still wet from the early dew, and a few birds hopped from branch to branch searching for crumbs left by families the evening before. In the middle of the park sat a man named Paul. His clothes were worn, his boots were old, and his face carried the lines of many hard years. Paul was a veteran, once strong and proud, but now living without a home. The park had become his resting place where he could find peace under the open sky. Paul sat on a wooden bench near the fountain. He watched the water rise and fall, thinking about his past. He remembered the days when he wore a uniform and walked with a team of brave men. He remembered the pride he felt when people shook his hand and called him a hero. But those days felt far away now. Life had changed, and he struggled to keep up with the world outside the military. Still, he tried to keep his spirit strong. Every day he woke with hope that tomorrow would be a little better. A police car slowly entered the park. The sound of its tires on the gravel path broke the calm. A young officer stepped out of the car. His name was Officer Grant. He was new to the job, still learning the ways of the city. Grant had been told by his supervisor to keep the park clear of people who slept on benches. The city wanted the park to look clean for visitors. Grant did not know Paul's story. He only saw a man with a backpack sitting too long in one place. Grant walked toward Paul. His steps were firm, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He had been trained to give orders with confidence, even when he felt unsure. When he reached the bench, he stood tall and said, "Sir, you cannot stay here. You need to leave the park." Paul looked up slowly. His eyes showed kindness, but also a deep tiredness. He did not answer right away. He wanted to choose his words carefully. After a pause, he said softly, "This bench is the only place I have. I am not hurting anyone. I just need a little time to rest." Grant shifted uncomfortably. He felt a small tug in his heart. Something about the way Paul spoke made him hesitate. But his duty was clear, and he repeated, "I understand, sir, but rules are rules." "You cannot stay here," Paul sighed. He did not want trouble. He had been through enough in life to know when to step away. Still, it hurt to be pushed out of a place where he felt safe. He reached for his old backpack and stood up slowly. His legs ached, but he tried not to show his weakness. He nodded politely and said, "I will go." At that moment, a small group of men entered the park from the other side. They were tall, strong, and walked with quiet confidence. Each of them wore simple clothes, but there was something about their steps that showed discipline. They were former SEALs, men who once trained and served with Paul. Though they had left the service, their bond with Paul had never broken. They often checked on him, making sure he was safe. One of the men, named Tom, saw what was happening from a distance. He whispered to the others, and they all moved closer. Their faces grew serious as they watched Paul being asked to leave. To them, Paul was not just a homeless man. He was their brother, someone who had stood beside them in the hardest of times. They would not let him be treated without respect. Paul noticed his old friends approaching, but he said nothing. A part of him felt embarrassed. He did not want them to see him being told to leave like this. But another part of him felt comforted knowing they were there. The air in the park grew heavy, as if something important was about to happen. Officer Grant, unaware of who these men were, stood waiting for Paul to move. The quiet moment stretched on. Paul held his backpack. The officer stood firm, and the group of SEALs came closer, their silence carrying more weight than any words. The entire park seemed to pause, as if holding its breath for what would happen next. The air in the park grew still as the group of men walked closer. Their steps were quiet, but there was a strength in the way they moved. Officer Grant noticed them and turned his head. He saw 6 men, all tall and steady, with eyes that seemed to see more than most people. He did not know who they were, but he felt something different about them. Their silence filled the space stronger than any sound. Paul stood with his backpack hanging from one shoulder. He lowered his eyes, not wanting the officer to think there would be a problem. But inside he felt a mix of sadness and pride. Sadness, because he was being treated as if he did not belong anywhere. Pride, because the men approaching were not strangers. They were his old brothers from the service, men he had trusted with his life. Tom, the one who walked in front, reached the bench first. He looked at Paul, then at Officer Grant. His voice was calm but firm when he spoke. "Is there a problem here, officer?" His words were polite, yet they carried a weight that made people listen. Grant adjusted his hat and cleared his throat. "This man was sitting here for too long. I was told to keep the park clear. I asked him to leave." His voice was steady, but inside he felt unsure. The way the men stood together gave him a strange feeling, as if he was facing something much larger than himself. Paul spoke quietly, almost like he wanted to end the moment quickly. "It's fine, Tom, I'll go. No need to make it bigger." He looked down, his hands tightening on the straps of his backpack. He did not want pity. He did not want to seem weak. He wanted only to move with dignity, but the other men did not step back. Another one named Adam took a slow breath and said, "Paul is not just anyone. He served this country. He gave more than most people will ever understand. This park is free for all. He has every right to sit here and rest." His tone was calm, but every word carried deep respect. The park was quiet. A few passers-by stopped at a distance, sensing something unusual. They did not know the details, but they could feel the tension. The fountain kept flowing, its gentle sound filling the silence. Grant felt the eyes of the men on him. He was young and new in his role. He had only followed orders, but something in his heart told him this was not the same as other cases. He looked at Paul again. For the first time, he noticed the way Paul stood, straight-backed even in his tiredness. He noticed the old boots, worn but polished, as if Paul still carried habits of discipline. He noticed the way the 6 men stood around him, not with aggression but with loyalty. It was clear that Paul was more than what he seemed. Tom stepped closer to Paul and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to walk away," he said softly. "We are here." His words were simple, but they carried years of friendship. Paul felt warmth in his chest. He had tried to carry his struggles alone, but in this moment he was reminded that he was not forgotten. Grant hesitated. His mind ran through the rules he had been given, but his heart was pulling him in another direction. He thought about why he had joined the police. It was to protect people, not to push them away. He looked again at Paul's face, and something shifted inside him. His voice came out quieter than before. "Maybe I was too quick. Maybe I should listen first." The SEALs remained silent, letting the young officer's words settle. Paul nodded slowly. "I am not here to cause trouble. I only sit here to find peace. I have nowhere else to go." His words were honest, without anger. They were simple truths, spoken from a tired soul. Grant felt the weight of those words. He realized that rules without understanding could harm more than help. He took a step back, giving space instead of pressure. "I hear you," he said at last. His tone was softer now. "You can stay." For the first time since the conversation began, Paul allowed himself a small smile. It was faint, but it reached his eyes. The SEALs exchanged quiet glances, their bond unspoken but clear. The block around the park grew silent, not from fear but from respect. People nearby felt they had witnessed something important, a lesson in dignity and honor. Paul sat down again on the bench. His friends stood nearby, not as guards but as brothers. Officer Grant remained for a moment watching them, then gave a small nod and turned back toward his car. His steps were slower, his mind heavy with new thoughts. He had learned something today, something no training class had ever taught him. The park slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Birds flew from branch to branch, the fountain sparkled in the sunlight, and Paul rested with quiet strength. Around him stood 6 men who carried no weapons, yet their presence alone had silenced an entire block. The park was calm again, yet something had changed. Paul sat quietly on the bench, his backpack resting beside him. The 6 men stood near, not drawing attention to themselves, but simply being present. Their silence was not empty. It was filled with respect and loyalty that could be felt even by strangers walking by. People glanced at them, sensing a story they did not fully understand, but they also felt no need to disturb the moment. Officer Grant had already returned to his car. He did not drive away right away. Instead, he sat inside holding the steering wheel and thinking deeply. His heart was restless. He had come into the park following simple instructions, but now he felt as if he had been given a lesson about humanity. The image of Paul's tired but steady face would not leave his mind. Grant whispered to himself, "Rules mean nothing if we forget respect." Back at the bench, Tom crouched down beside Paul. His voice was low and gentle. "You do not need to feel shame, brother. We all know the path of life can twist in ways we never expected. What matters is that you are still standing." Paul gave a faint laugh, though it carried no humor. "Standing, yes, but without direction. The world feels too fast now. I served with pride, But after leaving the service, I could not find my place. Step by step, I slipped until this became my life. He lifted his hand and motioned toward the park around him. His eyes showed both sadness and strength. Adam, who stood nearby, spoke firmly. You are not forgotten, Paul. You think you are alone, but look at us. We have never stopped being your brothers. We still walk with you. The other men nodded in agreement. They did not need long speeches. Their simple presence said enough. Still, their words reached Paul's heart. He felt a warmth spreading through him. For a long time, he had carried his struggle in silence. To hear these men speak so openly reminded him that bonds formed in hardship never truly fade. A child passed by holding his mother's hand. The boy pointed at the fountain and laughed, his small voice echoing through the park. Paul watched him for a moment. A soft smile touched his lips. Life is simple for them, he said quietly. They do not yet know how heavy the world can be. Tom placed a hand on Paul's shoulder again. That is why we must guide them. That is why we cannot lose hope no matter where life takes us. Even here, sitting on this bench, you are teaching lessons. People see you and they learn about patience, about quiet strength. Paul lowered his head. It is hard to believe I can still give something, Adam answered without delay. You gave long ago and the gift remains. Service does not vanish just because life becomes hard. You are living proof of sacrifice. That itself is a gift. The park seemed to grow brighter as the sun rose higher. A soft breeze moved the leaves, carrying with it the calm voices of the men. Passers-by felt drawn to the area, though none came too close. They respected the circle formed around Paul. They respected the silence that seemed to tell a story of its own. One of the men, Daniel, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. His voice was steady. Brother, you do not have to fight this alone anymore. We will find a way to help you. You do not need to live without shelter. There are doors still open. You only need someone to walk with you to them. Paul's eyes grew wet, though he quickly blinked them clear. I do not want to be a burden, he whispered. Tom shook his head. You were never a burden. You carried us through times when the weight was heavy. Now it is our turn to carry you. The 6 men looked at one another with silent agreement. They had faced storms together, and now they stood ready to face a different kind of storm. Paul felt the strength of their bond surround him. For the first time in many years, he felt as if the road ahead might hold hope. The park remained quiet, but it was no longer the same kind of silence. It was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of unity, of men who shared trust deeper than words. Around them, the world went on, but within that circle, a promise was formed. The sun climbed higher above the park, filling the space with golden light. Paul sat quietly, still holding his backpack, while his 6 brothers stood near. The promise they had given was not loud or dramatic. It was simple, yet it carried the weight of trust. Paul looked at each of them, his heart torn between doubt and hope. For so long, he had depended only on himself. Could he really allow them to step into his struggle? Tom noticed the hesitation in Paul's eyes. He leaned forward and spoke in a calm voice. We are not here to take control of your life. We are here to walk beside you. Sometimes the hardest step is allowing others to share the road. Paul took a deep breath. His hands pressed against the rough fabric of his backpack as if it was his last shield. I do not want pity, he said softly. Adam replied without delay. This is not pity. This is loyalty. When we were in service, we all carried one another. None of us made it alone. This is no different. His words were strong but gentle. The other men nodded, their faces steady. Daniel added, You once stood for us when we were weak. I remember days when your courage gave us strength. Now let us return that gift. Let us stand for you. Paul's eyes lowered. Memories of long nights in distant places rose in his mind. He remembered voices calling out in the dark, moments when fear could have broken them but did not. He had been there for them then. Perhaps now it was right to let them be there for him. Tom straightened and looked at the group. Here is what we will do. Paul needs a place of rest, a roof, and a bed. We can pool our resources. Each of us can give a part, and together we will create something whole. Adam smiled slightly. More than money, he needs company. A roof without friends is just walls. We can take turns staying with him, helping him adjust, helping him believe again. The men spoke quietly, forming a plan as naturally as if they were still on duty. They had spent years working in perfect coordination, and that bond had not faded. Paul listened, feeling a mix of gratitude and unease. I do not want to take from you, he said again, but his voice was weaker now, the doubt slowly losing ground to hope. Tom looked him in the eye. You are not taking. You are giving us a chance to honor our bond. That is something we all need. At that moment, an older woman walked by with her small dog. She paused, noticing the group gathered around the bench. She had seen Paul many times before, sitting quietly, never causing harm. She smiled warmly and said, "He is a good man. He always greets me kindly when I pass." Her words, though simple, carried truth. She continued on her way, leaving behind a gentle reminder that even strangers had noticed Paul's quiet dignity. Paul felt a lump in his throat. It was not just his brothers who cared. Even small voices from the community had seen him for more than his struggle. His spirit lifted. He whispered, "Maybe I am not as invisible as I thought." The group agreed to meet again later that evening, this time at Tom's house. Paul would come with them. For now, they wanted to walk him out of the park together. The idea was not to make a scene, but to show unity. As they left the bench, Paul felt lighter. The fountain sparkled in the sunlight as if celebrating the moment. Children played nearby, their laughter mixing with the sound of the water. The park no longer felt like a place of rejection. It felt like a place of beginning. Officer Grant, still in his car, watched from a distance. He saw Paul walking with the 6 men and realized something powerful. Strength was not always about authority or rules. Sometimes strength was about standing together, quietly and firmly. He whispered to himself, "I will remember this." Then he turned the key and slowly drove away. His heart changed. Paul walked between his brothers, his steps slow but steady. For the first time in a long while, the road ahead did not look endless. It looked like a path he could walk, not alone, but with those who still believed in him. Evening slowly settled over the town. The sky turned soft shades of orange and pink, while the first stars began to show above. Paul walked beside his 6 brothers as they left the park and headed toward Tom's house. The streets were calm and the sound of footsteps echoed gently on the pavement. Paul carried his backpack tightly, as if it was the last piece of himself he could control. Still, with every step he felt the weight of his loneliness begin to lift. When they reached Tom's home, the front porch light glowed warmly. Tom opened the door and welcomed everyone inside. The house smelled of fresh bread, and the wooden walls carried the comfort of family. Paul paused at the doorway, unsure if he should enter. For years he had avoided places where he felt out of place. His life on the streets had taught him to keep distance from comfort, because comfort was something he believed no longer belonged to him. Tom noticed the hesitation and placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is your place too," he said quietly. "Step inside, brother." Paul nodded slowly and entered. The living room was simple but full of warmth. A soft rug covered the floor, photographs hung on the walls, and a small fire glowed in the corner. The other men settled in easily, but Paul remained standing, his eyes moving across the room as if trying to believe it was real. Adam guided him to the sofa. "Sit, rest for a while." His tone was kind but firm, the way a brother speaks when he knows what is needed. Paul lowered himself onto the sofa. The cushions were soft, and he almost felt guilty for enjoying them. His life had been full of hard surfaces, cold benches, and the open sky. Now, for the first time in years, he felt the comfort of home. Daniel walked into the kitchen and returned with a warm bowl of soup. He placed it gently in front of Paul. "Eat. This is the beginning." Paul held the bowl with both hands. Steam rose gently, and the smell reminded him of meals long past, meals shared with family and friends before life had changed. He took a careful sip, and the warmth spread through him. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the feeling settle deep within. The 6 men sat around him, speaking softly about their lives since leaving service. They talked about jobs, families, and challenges they had faced. Each of them had walked a different road, but the bond between them remained strong. As Paul listened, he felt a strange mix of sadness and joy. Sadness because he realized how much he had missed. Joy because he was still part of their circle. After dinner, Tom brought out a small notebook. He placed it on the table and opened it to a blank page. "This is for you, Paul," he said. "We want to write a plan together. Not just a roof, but a new start. Step by step, we will move forward." Paul looked at the blank page. For years, his life had felt like an empty space without direction. Now that same emptiness was being offered as a canvas for hope. He felt his throat tighten. I do not know where to begin, he admitted. Adam leaned forward. That is why we are here. You do not need to begin alone. We will write the first steps together. One by one, they shared ideas. A visit to a shelter that worked with veterans, a contact who could help with job training, a doctor who understood the needs of those who had served. Each idea was written down. Slowly, the blank page began to fill with lines of hope. Paul watched the words appear and felt something stir inside him. It was not just a plan on paper. It was proof that his life was not finished. His story was still being written. Later, as the fire burned low, Paul leaned back against the sofa. His backpack rested near his feet, but for the first time he did not cling to it. He felt safe enough to let it be. He looked at his brothers and whispered, "Thank you." The room grew quiet, but the silence was warm. None of them needed to answer with words. Their presence said enough. Paul closed his eyes, and for the first night in many years, he felt peace as sleep slowly came over him. The next morning, sunlight poured gently through the windows of Tom's house. Paul awoke to the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of birds outside. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel the anxiety that usually came with waking up on the streets. Instead, he felt a quiet curiosity about the day ahead. Tom was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for everyone. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "Coffee and eggs are ready." The warm tone of his voice made the room feel safe, like a place where worries could stay outside. Paul rose slowly from the sofa. He felt stiff, as if his body was reminding him of years of struggle. But he also felt a new sense of energy. The 6 men gathered around the table, their faces calm but encouraging. None of them pushed him, yet their presence gave him strength. After breakfast, Tom handed Paul a small notepad and a pen. "Today we start small," he said. "The first steps do not need to be big. Just one thing at a time." Paul nodded, unsure at first. He had grown used to making small choices on the streets, but those choices often had to do with survival. Today, however, he would make choices for himself, guided by friends who cared about him. Adam spoke next. "We will take you to meet some people who can help with housing. You do not have to decide everything today. Just listen and we will guide you." Paul agreed quietly. The 6 men smiled, proud of his willingness. They left the house and walked together through the quiet morning streets. Each step felt lighter than the last. For the first time in years, Paul felt he was moving forward, not just surviving. Their first stop was a small community center. A kind woman named Mrs. Lewis greeted them at the door. She had worked with veterans for many years and had seen countless struggles, but she immediately noticed Paul's quiet dignity. "Welcome, Paul," she said warmly. "We are glad you are here." Paul felt a nervous flutter in his chest. He had avoided places like this for years, fearing judgment or pity. But Mrs. Lewis's calm smile eased the tension. Tom explained that Paul had friends who cared and wanted to help him find stability. Mrs. Lewis nodded and began to outline programs for housing, job training, and health support. Paul listened quietly, his eyes wide. For years, he had thought these doors were closed to him. Now they were opening, and he realized that asking for help was not weakness. It was a step toward reclaiming his life. After the meeting, the group walked to a nearby park for lunch. They found a quiet spot under a tree. Paul unpacked a small sandwich that Tom had brought. The men spoke gently, sharing stories of their past missions, but also of simple joys like favorite books, sports, and family moments. The conversation was light, yet it reminded Paul that life had more to offer than struggle and loneliness. Daniel looked at him with a soft smile. "See, brother, life is not only about surviving. It is also about enjoying the small moments. You deserve them just as much as anyone else." Paul nodded, feeling warmth spread through him. For the first time in a long while, he laughed lightly at a story Adam told about a lost dog during a training exercise. The sound surprised him, as if he had forgotten what laughter felt like. By the time they returned to Tom's house, Paul felt a little stronger. The steps had been small, but each one carried meaning. He was beginning to understand that rebuilding his life would not happen instantly, but with patient effort and loyal friends, it was possible. That night, as Paul lay on the sofa, he thought about the day. He had met people willing to help, shared a meal with friends, and felt joy without fear. A sense of hope settled deep within him. His brothers watched him quietly, knowing he had taken the first steps toward a brighter future. Paul whispered softly into the quiet room, Maybe I can start again. The 6 men exchanged knowing glances. They had seen many challenges in life, but this was different. This was the beginning of renewal. Not only for Paul, but for all of them who had once fought together and now fought for each other's well-being. The next morning, Paul woke feeling lighter than he had in years. The sunlight streamed through the window, painting the room in warm gold. For a moment, he lay still, letting himself enjoy the quiet comfort. It was not just the bed or the roof over his head. It was the feeling of safety, of knowing he was not alone. Tom was already in the kitchen, humming softly as he prepared breakfast. Paul joined him, carrying a small cup of coffee. The aroma filled the room, making him smile. He had not shared a simple breakfast like this in a long time. It was not about food. It was about connection, about being part of a small family again. After breakfast, the 6 men gathered to discuss the day's plan. Today, they would help Paul take steps toward independence. They had lined up appointments with a vocational counselor and a community workshop. The goal was not to rush him, but to show him that progress could be steady and achievable. Paul listened carefully as Tom outlined the schedule. "We will go together," Tom said, "step by step." "You do not need to do anything alone," Adam added. "And remember, it is okay to ask questions. You are learning, and no one expects perfection. Just focus on moving forward." Paul nodded. For so long he had carried the burden of life alone. Now he realized that having someone beside him made the path clearer, less frightening. He felt a small spark of courage grow inside him. Their first stop was a small vocational center. A friendly counselor named Ms. Harper greeted Paul warmly. She asked about his skills, his interests, and his past experiences. Paul spoke slowly at first, unsure if his words mattered. But as he explained the skills he had learned during his service, Ms. Harper's eyes lit up with interest. She listened carefully, nodded, and suggested ways his experience could be applied to jobs in the community. Paul felt a strange mix of pride and disbelief. He had thought his skills were only useful in the military. Now he saw that they could open doors to a new life. He looked at his brothers who stood quietly nearby, giving him space but ready to support him whenever he needed. After the session, the group walked to a nearby workshop. It was a place where people could learn basic computer skills, carpentry, and other trades. Paul felt nervous entering at first. The machines and tools looked unfamiliar, and he worried about making mistakes. But Tom placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "One step at a time," he said. "You can learn this." Paul tried a few simple exercises, following instructions carefully. Slowly, he began to feel more confident. A sense of accomplishment grew in him. It was not just about learning new skills. It was about proving to himself that he could adapt, that he could take control of his life again. During lunch, they sat outside under a tree. Paul watched children playing nearby. Their laughter reminded him of freedom, of moments he had almost forgotten. Daniel spoke softly. "See, brother? Life is full of chances to grow. You are not too late. You are starting now." Paul smiled, feeling warmth spread through him. For the first time in years, he felt hope that was steady and real. He realized that he was not defined by the past, by hardship or struggle. He was defined by what he did today, by the steps he was taking to build a new life. By evening, they returned to Tom's house. Paul felt tired but fulfilled. He had faced new challenges and he had succeeded. Sitting by the fire, he reflected on the day. The fear he had carried for so long had softened. With the support of his brothers, he felt he could face whatever came next. He looked at the 6 men who had become his family. "I think I can do this," he said quietly. "I really can." They nodded, their faces calm but full of pride. It was not only Paul who was learning. It was all of them, reminded of the power of loyalty, care, and friendship. Together they were building a life not defined by struggle, but by support, courage, and hope. Paul leaned back, closing his eyes, feeling safe, seen, and ready for the days to come. The sun rose gently over the town, casting warm light across the streets. Paul woke feeling a quiet excitement in his chest. The past weeks had been full of small steps, but today felt different. Today felt like a new beginning. He dressed carefully, choosing clean clothes that Tom had helped him pick out. For the first time in a long while, he looked in the mirror and saw a man ready to face the world. Tom and the others gathered in the kitchen for breakfast. The table was filled with simple but nourishing food. Paul sat among them, feeling a sense of belonging he had not felt for years. He listened to the friendly chatter of his brothers. their voices calm and encouraging. He realized that home was not just a place. It was the people who cared, the ones who walked beside him through every step. After breakfast, they set out together to finalize some of the plans they had started. Paul had appointments at the community center, where he would be registered for a small apartment and given guidance on job opportunities. Each step felt less intimidating because his brothers were with him, offering advice, reassurance, and laughter. At the community center, Paul met Mrs. Lewis again. She greeted him with a warm smile. "It is good to see you, Paul. You are making wonderful progress." Paul felt a wave of pride. He had feared that asking for help was weakness, but now he saw that it was a strength. He had faced his fear, and it had led to real change. After the paperwork was completed, Tom suggested a small walk through the park. Paul agreed, and the group strolled along the paths he had once called his home. The grass was green, the fountain sparkled, and children played nearby. But now the park felt different. It was no longer a place of struggle. It was a place of reflection, a place where he could remember the past but also look forward to the future. Adam spoke softly as they walked. "Remember, brother, every day is a chance to build on the steps you have taken. The road ahead may have challenges, but you have strength and you have support." Paul nodded, feeling the truth of Adam's words. He realized that life was not about perfection, but about progress. Every small action, every step toward improvement mattered, and he no longer had to face it alone. They stopped near a bench, and Paul sat for a moment. He watched the children laugh and run, the fountain glittering in the sunlight. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the men who had stood by him, for the community that had welcomed him, and for the chance to reclaim his life. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have come far, Paul. Not everyone finds the courage to start again, but you did, and we are proud of you." Paul's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of hope and joy, not sadness. "I could not have done this alone," he said quietly. "You all have helped me more than words can say." Tom smiled, his eyes gentle. "That is what brothers do. We do not leave each other behind. You once stood for us, and now we stand for you. This is just the beginning of a new life." The group stayed in the park a little longer, talking, laughing, and planning small steps for the days ahead. Paul felt a sense of balance returning to his life. The past struggles were still part of him, but they no longer controlled him. He had a home, a plan, and most importantly, a family who believed in him. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Paul stood beside his brothers. He looked out over the park and whispered softly to himself, "I am ready." The 6 men stood quietly around him, their presence steady and reassuring. They did not need words. Paul felt the strength of their loyalty, the warmth of their care, and the knowledge that no matter what came next, he would never be alone. For the first time in many years, Paul felt truly free. Free from fear, free from loneliness, and free to embrace the life ahead. With his brothers by his side, he knew that each day would bring new opportunities, new joys, and new hope. And as the stars began to shine above, Paul smiled. His journey was just beginning, but this time he would walk it with strength, courage, and the love of those who would always stand beside him.